The U.S. Surgeon General doesn't issue advisories about personal failures. He issues them about epidemics. In 2023, for the first time in American history, the Surgeon General issued a formal advisory on loneliness and social isolation. Not a blog post, not a recommendation, a public health emergency declaration. The kind reserved for tobacco, for obesity, for the opioid crisis. That document found that roughly half of American adults were already experiencing measurable loneliness before the pandemic made everything worse. That is not a story about people who didn't try hard enough. That is a story about what happened to an entire generation's social world and why it happened, and why almost no one told you clearly while it was happening. This video is going to name 5 structural forces that converged not gradually over a century, but within roughly a single decade, to make adult friendship in America harder than it has been at any documented point in modern history. Not harder for some people, harder for almost everyone at the same time. Let's start with the numbers themselves, because the data contains something important that most coverage gets wrong. Research from the Survey Center on American Life and the American Enterprise Institute shows that the percentage of Americans reporting no close friendships has risen significantly. And for men under 30, the numbers are stark enough that researchers have started using the phrase friendship recession without apology. But here is where it gets precise in a way that matters for understanding your actual experience. The most revealing finding isn't about people who have no friends. It's about people who have friends but don't feel close to them. A 2024 study published in PLOS One, one of the most comprehensive friendship surveys conducted in recent years, found that while most Americans report having friends, over 40% said they were not as emotionally close to their friends as they would like to be. Not friendless, not isolated in the dramatic sense, just not close enough. That distinction is important because it matches what most people in this situation actually experience. Not a total absence of social contact. A specific, persistent gap between the contact they have and the depth they're looking for. The weekly text chain that never goes deeper. The work friend who would be a real friend if the structure supported it. The person you'd call close on a survey, but wouldn't call at midnight if something actually happened. In 2003, American adults spent an average of 5.5 hours a week socializing. By 2019, that had dropped to 4.5 hours. After the pandemic, it dropped again and didn't recover. Between 2003 and 2024, the amount of time Americans spent attending or hosting a social event declined by roughly 50%. Those aren't numbers about broken people. Those are numbers about a broken environment. And the question worth asking is, what exactly broke? And when? So let's talk about the 5 structural forces that converged to make this happen. 5 things happened. Not 1, not 2, 5, at roughly the same time. The first is the one most people have heard of. The collapse of the ambient workplace. For most of the 20th century, the office was, whether anyone called it this, the primary social infrastructure of adult life. Not because it produced deep friendships automatically, but because it produced the raw material. Repeated, low-stakes, unscheduled contact with other human beings. The hallway conversation. The lunch that happened because 2 people were hungry at the same time. The version of you that other people could see being ordinary, unremarkable, and fully human. Remote work didn't just move your laptop. It removed the last ambient social structure most adults had. For American adults, face-to-face socializing has declined roughly 30% compared to just 20 years ago. For unmarried Americans, the decline exceeds 35%. And for a large and growing portion of the workforce, that structure is simply gone. Not paused, gone. The second force is the death of third places. Third places. The concept coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg are the spaces that are neither home nor work, where people gather without agenda. The neighborhood bar, the barbershop, the diner, the park bench, the bowling league, the church basement. These weren't just nice to have. They were the mechanism by which adults stayed embedded in a local social world without having to schedule it. After the 1970s, Americans pulled back from just about every form of socializing. By the late 1990s, the share saying they had visited friends' homes in the previous week had declined by more than 40%. Then the internet accelerated what was already in motion. When you can order anything from your couch, there is no errand that forces you into proximity with your neighbors. When you can consume any entertainment alone, there is no shared cultural experience that puts you in the same room as strangers who might become something more. The infrastructure that used to produce accidental belonging has been, piece by piece, removed from the landscape. The third force is geographic mobility. Deep friendship requires time, and time requires proximity, and proximity requires staying. As adults, we have fewer opportunities to make friends, simply because we are less likely to be thrust into new places or pushed to participate in new activities. But the economic pressures of the last 2 decades have pushed Americans to relocate more frequently, for jobs, for housing costs, for opportunity. Every relocation resets the social clock. You arrive somewhere new, with no ambient social structure, no existing network, no version of yourself that local people have had years to know. And building from zero as an adult is categorically different from the friend-making that happened in childhood and early adulthood, when proximity was enforced by institutions and time was abundant. Now we come to the fourth force, and it's the one that replaced everything else without replacing anything it removed: algorithmic social media. This is where it gets precise in a way that deserves care. Social media did not make people antisocial. It gave people a substitute for the ambient social contact they'd already lost, a way to feel connected without the friction, the vulnerability, the unpredictability of actual presence. As one researcher put it, social media gives people snacks of connection. But it's possible to subsist entirely on those snacks and still be, in any meaningful sense, starving. The fifth force is the collapse of membership institutions. For most of the 20th century, Americans belonged to things: churches, unions, civic organizations, fraternal groups, neighborhood associations. These weren't primarily social organizations, but they functioned socially. They put people in the same room on a regular basis, gave them a shared identity, and created the conditions for the kind of repeated contact that, over time, produces genuine closeness. Researchers point to declining membership in marriage, religious organizations, and labor unions as likely contributors to the ongoing decline in social ties. 5 forces. 5 different removal mechanisms, each one dismantling a different layer of the ambient social architecture that previous generations inherited without knowing it was there. And now we arrive at what makes this moment historically unusual. Here is what makes this moment historically unusual. Each of these forces has existed, in isolation, at other points in American history. There were eras of geographic mobility before. There were periods of declining civic participation before. There were technologies that changed how people spent their leisure time before. Television produced some of the same concerns in the 1950s. What has never happened before, not in any comparable period, is all 5 converging at the same time, for the same generation, within roughly the same decade. Remote work scaled to tens of millions of adults simultaneously. Third places declined and were not replaced. Geographic mobility increased, while the institutions that helped people re-embed in new places weakened. Algorithmic media grew sophisticated enough to produce the feeling of social satiation without the substance of it. And the membership institutions that had anchored adult social life for generations quietly lost their grip, all of it, at once. Now consider the people in your life who seem to have figured this out. The ones with a full social calendar, the ones who seem to accumulate friends naturally, the ones for whom belonging looks easy. Look closely. Almost universally, they are still connected to at least one ambient social structure. An in-person workplace they've been in for years. A neighborhood they've lived in long enough to be known. A religious community that meets weekly without requiring scheduling effort. A city they haven't left, where their network has had a decade to deepen. They are not better at friendship. They are operating inside a structure that friendship can grow in. The viewer who works remotely, relocated in the last 5 years, no longer participates in organized religion, and doesn't have a third place they return to regularly, is not worse at connection. They are trying to grow something in soil that has been methodically stripped of everything that made it fertile. And the 42% who report wanting to be emotionally closer to the friends they already have, that is what this stripped environment produces. Not absence, shallowness. Contact without the conditions for depth, the texture of connection without the substance. Not your fault, and also not your sentence. If what this video opened is something you want to go deeper on, the full structural case, the evidence, the complete framework for understanding exactly how your social world was dismantled, and why none of it was your verdict, there is a resource in the description built precisely for that. It is the detailed, evidence-backed version of everything this video could only introduce. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now let's talk about what this actually means for you. The exoneration matters. Understanding that you are living in historically difficult conditions for adult friendship formation is not a small thing. Because as long as you believe the problem is you, your personality, your effort, your likability, the solution looks like self-improvement. Work on yourself. Be more open. Try harder. And if self-improvement doesn't produce results, you confirm the fear that something about you makes sustained closeness impossible. But when the problem is structural, the solution looks different. You are not trying to fix yourself. You are trying to build or find one ambient social structure that was removed from your life. Just one, not a full friendship infrastructure, not a social transformation. One recurring context where you are present with other people without it requiring constant scheduling effort. One place you return to. One group you're embedded in. The path forward is not to try harder at the thing that wasn't working. It's to understand what's structurally missing and build it deliberately at the pace that's actually realistic for someone who has already been carrying this for a while. That is a different kind of task than putting yourself out there. It is smaller in some ways, more specific, and far more likely to produce something that lasts. There is a question worth sitting with after this video. Not a plan, not a commitment. Just a question. Which of the 5 structures is missing from your life right now? Not all of them, probably, but the one that's most absent, because naming the specific structural gap is different from naming yourself as the gap. And you already understand this better than you think. If you want the full structural case, the complete evidence-backed argument for why what happened to your social world makes complete sense. The link in the description and the pinned comment will take you there. It is the deeper version of everything this video introduced. Which of the 5 forces hit your social world hardest? And did you recognize it while it was happening? Or only after? Something worth carrying from today. The Surgeon General of the United States issued a public health emergency about the experience you have been privately treating as evidence of something wrong with you. He didn't call it a personal failing. He called it an epidemic, and epidemics have causes, not character flaws. Not effort deficits, not the specific wrong thing about the specific person experiencing them. Causes. 5 of them, named today, documented in research, visible in the data of how Americans actually spend their time, data that shows without ambiguity that people are spending dramatically less time in real contact with other people than they were 20 years ago. That is not a story about a generation that stopped caring about connection. It is a story about a generation that had the structures supporting connection removed, one by one, without announcement, while being told the solution was to try harder. You tried, and you were trying to build something in conditions that were actively working against it. What changes when you know that, really know it, not just read it and move on, is that the question shifts. Not, what is wrong with me? But, what is structurally missing? And what is one thing I can actually do about that? Those are different questions, and different questions lead to different answers. The version of this problem that was your fault was always smaller than it felt. The version that belongs to the structural forces named today is larger than you probably allowed yourself to believe. That rebalancing from self-blame to structural clarity is not a comfort. It is a map. And maps are useful, not because they make the terrain easier, because they show you exactly where you are. And that is always the beginning of finding your way somewhere else.